The bullet that grazed Jake Morrison's shoulder in the dusty streets of Abilene, Kansas, in the summer of 1878, barely broke the skin. But when he saw the beautiful woman rushing toward him with concern flooding her green eyes, he decided right then that his injury needed considerably more attention than it actually required. Clara Bennett had been standing outside the general store when the gunfight erupted between Jake and a card cheat named Dylan, who had been caught with an ace up his sleeve at the Silver Spur Saloon. The exchange had been quick, just 3 shots fired before Dylan hit the ground with a shoulder wound of his own, and Jake stumbled backward, his hand flying to his arm. Clara had dropped her packages without thinking, her nursing instincts taking over as she hurried across the rutted street, her pale blue dress kicking up dust around her ankles. "You are hurt," she said breathlessly, reaching for his arm. Her fingers were gentle but firm as she examined the tear in his shirt where the bullet had passed through. "We need to get you to Dr. Henley immediately." Jake looked down at her upturned face, at the worry creasing her brow and the way the afternoon sunlight caught the copper highlights in her brown hair, and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the shallow wound on his shoulder. "I reckon it is worse than it looks," he said, letting his voice go a bit rough with manufactured pain. "Feels like the bone might be cracked." The truth was, he had been shot worse by a thorny mesquite branch just last week, but Clara did not need to know that. She was already wrapping her arm around his waist to support him, her warmth seeping through his dusty shirt, and Jake decided he had never felt better in his entire 26 years of life. "Can you walk?" Clara asked, her voice tight with concern. "The doctor's office is 3 buildings down." "I will manage with your help," Jake said, leaning into her more than strictly necessary. She smelled like lavender and something sweet he could not quite place, like fresh bread or honey. As they made their slow progress down the wooden sidewalk, Jake found himself wanting to stretch out their journey for as long as possible. Clara had arrived in Abilene just 2 months earlier from Boston, coming west after her father's death to live with her aunt and uncle who ran the town's boarding house. She had trained as a nurse back east and had been trying to convince Dr. Henley to take her on as an assistant, though the old physician was set in his ways about women in medicine. Jake knew all this because he had made it his business to learn everything he could about Clara Bennett since the first moment he had seen her stepping off the train. Her Eastern clothes pristine, and her chin held high despite the obvious uncertainty in her eyes. He had been too shy to approach her properly, always finding himself tongue-tied when she passed by, managing nothing more than a tip of his hat and a mumbled greeting. But now, with her arm wrapped around him and her attention focused entirely on his welfare, Jake felt like fortune had finally smiled on him. "Almost there," Clara encouraged as they reached the doctor's door. She knocked urgently, then helped Jake inside when the elderly physician appeared. Dr. Henley's examination room smelled of carbolic acid and old leather, the afternoon light filtering through dingy curtains. "What have we here?" Dr. Henley asked, his shrewd eyes taking in Jake's supposedly dire condition. "Gunshot wound to the shoulder," Clara explained quickly. "He says it might have hit the bone." Jake watched as she efficiently helped him remove his shirt, her movements practiced and professional despite the slight flush that colored her cheeks. The wound was revealed in all its underwhelming glory, a shallow graze that had already stopped bleeding. Jake saw Dr. Henley's eyebrows rise, saw the knowing glint in the old man's eyes as he caught Jake's gaze. Dr. Henley said diplomatically. "Why do you not clean and dress this wound, Miss Bennett? I will supervise. Consider it part of your training." Clara's face lit up with surprised pleasure. "Truly? Oh, thank you, Dr. Henley." She turned to the cabinet where medical supplies were stored, missing the conspiratorial wink the doctor sent Jake's way. Jake had the grace to look slightly sheepish, but he was not about to confess his deception now. For the next 20 minutes, Clara tended to his wound with gentle, capable hands. She cleaned it with careful attention, her fingers cool against his sun-warmed skin, and Jake found himself studying every detail of her face. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow, barely visible, and a smattering of freckles across her nose that her bonnet usually hid. When she concentrated, she bit her lower lip, and Jake found the gesture utterly captivating. "You are very brave," Clara said softly as she applied a bandage. "Most men would be complaining far more with such an injury." Jake felt a pang of guilt that he quickly suppressed. "I have had worse," he said truthfully. "Comes with the territory when you work cattle drives. You are a cowboy then?" Clara asked, securing the bandage with neat, precise movements. "Yes, ma'am, just finished a drive up from Texas. Been working for the Rockingham Ranch, though I am thinking of settling in Abilene more permanent-like. Good town with good people." He was looking directly at her when he said it, and he saw color rise in her cheeks again. "You should rest this arm for at least a week," Clara instructed, stepping back to survey her handiwork. "No heavy lifting, no riding if you can avoid it. I can check the bandage tomorrow if you would like, to make sure infection is not setting in." "I would appreciate that greatly," Jake said, perhaps too quickly. Dr. Henley made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, turning it into a cough. "Miss Bennett, you did excellent work," the doctor said. "If you are willing, I would be pleased to have you assist me here in the office." "Lord knows I could use the help, and you clearly have the skill for it." Clara's joy was so evident it made Jake's heart ache. "Oh, Dr. Henley, I would be honored. Thank you so much." After making arrangements to return the next day for both her new position and to check Jake's wound, Clara helped him back into his shirt with professional efficiency. But Jake noticed the way her hands lingered just a moment on his shoulders, the way her breath hitched slightly when their eyes met. Maybe, just maybe, she felt something too. "Let me walk you back to your aunt's boarding house," Jake offered as they stepped back out into the hot Kansas afternoon. "You should be resting," Clara protested, but she did not refuse when he fell into step beside her. "The walk will do me good," Jake assured her. "Besides, a gentleman does not let a lady walk alone, especially after she has shown him such kindness." They walked slowly through town, and Jake found himself talking more freely than he usually did, telling Clara about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about the cattle drives and the wide-open spaces that had become his home. Clara listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly paying attention, not just being polite. In turn, she told him about Boston, about the narrow streets so different from Abilene's wide avenues, about her work at a hospital there, and her dream of one day opening a clinic of her own. "Though that seems quite impossible here," she admitted. "The West is still so rough, and people are set in their ideas about what women should and should not do." "You impressed Dr. Henley today," Jake pointed out. "That is a start, and you are wrong about one thing. The West may be rough, but it is also a place where people can make new starts, can be whoever they are brave enough to be. I reckon if anyone can open a clinic, it would be someone with your determination." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes searching his face. "You really believe that?" "I do," Jake said simply, and he meant it. They had reached the boarding house, a large two-story building with a wide porch where Clara's Aunt Martha grew flowers in wooden boxes. Clara hesitated at the bottom of the steps, clearly reluctant to end their conversation. "Thank you for walking me home," she said. "And please do take care of that shoulder. I meant what I said about resting it." "I will follow doctor's orders faithfully," Jake promised with a grin that made her smile in return. "I will see you tomorrow then." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed, and Jake thought he detected a note of anticipation in her voice that matched his own. That evening, Jake sat in his small room at the Drover's Hotel and carefully examined his shoulder in the mirror. The wound was so minor, it barely warranted a bandage, just a pink line across his skin that would probably be completely healed in 2 days. He felt another twinge of guilt about his exaggeration, but he consoled himself with the thought that no real harm had been done. Clara had gotten the opportunity to prove herself to Dr. Henley. and Jake had gotten the chance to actually talk to the woman who had occupied his thoughts for weeks. Still, as he lay in bed that night listening to the sounds of Abilene settling down for the evening, the piano music from the saloons and the occasional shout of cowboys letting off steam, Jake wondered what Clara would think if she knew the truth. He resolved to confess to her eventually, once they knew each other better. Once she maybe cared for him enough to forgive the deception. The next day, Jake presented himself at Dr. Henley's office at precisely 2 o'clock, the time Clara had suggested. He found her already there, wearing a simple gray dress with a white apron over it, her hair pinned up in a practical bun. She looked up from the medical supplies she was organizing and smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Morrison, right on time. How is the shoulder feeling?" "A bit stiff," Jake said, which was not entirely a lie. He had deliberately slept on that side to ensure some soreness. "But better than yesterday." Clara gestured for him to sit on the examination table. Dr. Henley was out on a house call, she explained, but he had said she was perfectly capable of changing a simple bandage. As she carefully unwrapped the bandage from the previous day, Jake watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction to the wound's condition. Her fingers paused as she revealed the shallow graze, now already well on its way to healing. For a long moment she said nothing, just studied the wound with those intelligent green eyes. Then she looked up at Jake, and he saw understanding dawn in her expression, followed by something he could not quite read. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, her hands still resting gently on his arm. "This wound is healing remarkably well. Miraculously well, one might say, for something you thought might have cracked the bone." Jake felt heat rise in his face. Well, I may have been mistaken about the severity." "May have been," Clara repeated, and now there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Or perhaps you knew from the beginning that it was nothing more than a graze." There was no point in denial. Jake met her eyes directly. "I am sorry. I should not have exaggerated. It is just, well, you were there helping me, and you smelled so nice, and I have been wanting to talk to you for weeks but could never figure out what to say. And it just seemed like maybe fate was giving me a chance. And I took it, even though I should not have. And I am truly sorry if I wasted your time or made you worry unnecessarily." The words tumbled out in a rush, and when he finished, Clara was staring at him with wide eyes. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound that made something in Jake's chest expand with hope. "You have been wanting to talk to me?" she asked. "Since the day you arrived in Abilene," Jake admitted. "But you always seemed so proper and educated, and I am just a cowboy who barely made it through 8 years of schooling. I figured you would not want anything to do with someone like me." Clara shook her head, her expression softening. "Mr. Morrison, Jake, do you know why I left Boston?" He shook his head. "Because everyone there thought they knew exactly who I should be and what I should do. My father's colleagues thought I should marry one of them and give up my nursing. My friends thought I was mad to want to work at all. Everyone had opinions about my life except me. I came west because I wanted space to be myself, to make my own choices. The last thing I care about is whether someone had 8 years of schooling or 80. So you are not angry about the shoulder?" Jake asked hopefully. Clara picked up a clean cloth and began to gently clean his wound again, her touch even gentler than before. "I should be," she said. "It was deceptive and manipulative and really quite foolish." Jake's heart sank. "But," Clara continued, and he saw her fighting a smile, "it was also rather sweet in a completely misguided way. And it did lead to me getting this position with Dr. Henley, which I am truly grateful for. So no, I am not angry." "You are not?" Jake could hardly believe his luck. "I am not," Clara confirmed. She finished cleaning the wound and applied a much smaller bandage. "However, I do have one condition." "Anything," Jake said immediately. "No more pretending to be hurt. If you want to see me, you can simply ask. I promise I will not bite." "What if I want to see you tonight?" Jake asked, emboldened by her words. "There is a church social, music and dancing. Would you accompany me?" Clara's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I would like that very much. That evening, Jake called for Clara at the boarding house wearing his best shirt and vest, his boots polished and his hair still damp from the bathhouse. Clara's Aunt Martha answered the door, a stout woman with sharp eyes that took in every detail of Jake's appearance. "So you are the young man who got himself shot yesterday," she said without preamble. "Clara says you are healing up nicely." "Yes, ma'am, thanks to your niece's excellent care," Jake said politely. Aunt Martha said, but her eyes were not unkind. "You treat her respectfully, you hear. She is a good girl and has been through enough losing her father." "I will treat her like she is made of porcelain, ma'am, you have my word." "Porcelain breaks," Aunt Martha said. "Treat her like she is strong and capable because she is. That will serve you better." Before Jake could respond, Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, and whatever he had been about to say fled from his mind. She wore a dress of deep green that matched her eyes, her hair arranged in soft curls, and she was without question the most beautiful woman Jake had ever seen. "You look lovely," he managed to say as she descended the stairs. "Thank you," Clara said, a pleased blush coloring her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." The church social was held in a field just outside town, lanterns strung between posts creating pools of warm light as the sun set. A small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar while couples danced on a wooden platform that had been laid down for the occasion. Tables laden with food stretched along one side, and children ran between the adults, their laughter ringing out in the evening air. Jake introduced Clara to various people he knew, pleased by how easily she conversed with everyone from the ranch hands to the town's mayor. She had a gift for making people feel at ease, asking questions about their lives and remembering details they told her. Jake could see her winning over the community one person at a time. When the music shifted to a waltz, Jake offered Clara his hand. "May I have this dance?" "I thought you were supposed to be resting your shoulder," Clara teased, but she placed her hand in his. "I am feeling remarkably recovered," Jake said with a grin, leading her onto the dance floor. As they moved together to the music, Jake became aware of how perfectly Clara fit in his arms, how naturally they moved together. She was a good dancer, better than he was certainly, but she followed his lead without making him feel clumsy. "I never thought I would like the West," Clara said as they turned slowly under the lantern light. "When I first decided to come to Abilene, I was terrified. Boston was all I knew. But there is something about this place, about the openness and the possibilities. It makes me feel like I can breathe for the first time in years." "I am glad you came," Jake said quietly. "Real glad." Clara looked up at him, and in her eyes, Jake saw the same feeling that was growing in his own heart, that sense of recognition, of finding something he had not known he was looking for. They danced 3 more dances, then sat together at one of the tables, sharing a plate of food and talking about everything and nothing. Jake told her about his dreams of buying his own small ranch someday, nothing huge, just enough land to raise good horses and maybe some cattle. Clara told him about wanting to expand medical care in Abilene, maybe eventually establishing a real hospital. "We could use one," Jake said thoughtfully. "Nearest hospital is in Kansas City, and that is a hard journey when someone is injured or sick. Dr. Henley says the same thing, but it would take considerable money and effort. I have been saving what I can, but it will be years before I have enough." "Dreams worth having are worth working for," Jake said. "My pa used to say that." As the evening wore on and the social began to wind down, Jake walked Clara back to the boarding house, their steps slow and reluctant. At the door, Clara turned to face him, tilting her head back to look up at him in the moonlight. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said softly. "Thank you for giving a foolish cowboy a second chance," Jake replied. "I think you may have been foolish," Clara said, stepping a little closer, "but I also think you might be the most genuine man I have met in a very long time. Most men would not have admitted to exaggerating their injury. They would have just let me believe whatever I wanted to believe. I do not want anything between us built on lies," Jake said seriously, "even small ones." Clara reached up and touched his cheek gently. "That is exactly what I mean about genuine. Good night, Jake Morrison." "I will see you tomorrow." "You could not keep me away," Jake promised. Over the following weeks, Jake and Clara fell into a pattern of seeing each other nearly every day. Jake found excuses to visit Dr. Henley's office, bringing by firewood or helping to repair a loose step on the porch. Clara would treat any minor ailments he mentioned, real or imagined, though she quickly became adept at identifying which was which. Jake started attending Sunday services at the church just because he knew Clara would be there, and she began taking walks in the evening because she knew he would happen by the boarding house around that time. Aunt Martha watched their courtship with approval, while Uncle George, a quiet man who ran the local feed store, simply nodded his acceptance. Dr. Henley made pointed comments about young love and invited Jake to dinner twice, clearly giving his blessing to the match. But it was the small moments that Jake treasured most. The way Clara's face lit up when she saw him. The sound of her laughter when he told stories about mishaps on cattle drives. The feeling of her hand in his as they walked through town. The serious conversations they had about their hopes and fears, and everything in between. One evening in early September, about 6 weeks after they had met, Jake took Clara on a picnic to a spot outside town where a small creek ran through cottonwood trees, providing shade and the pleasant sound of running water. He had packed food from the hotel restaurant, and Clara had brought a quilt to sit on. As they ate and talked, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, Jake felt a contentment he had never known before. This was what he wanted, he realized. Not just today, but every day. Clara beside him, sharing his life, building a future together. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, noticing his silence. Jake took a breath, gathering his courage. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that I got shot," Clara laughed. "That is a strange thing to be grateful for." "Not so strange when it brought you into my life," Jake said. He shifted to face her more directly. "Clara, I know we have not known each other long, just a few weeks really. And I know I am not much, just a cowboy trying to make his way, but I care for you more than I have ever cared for anyone. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting. And I was hoping you might feel the same way." Clara's eyes were shining as she reached for his hand. "I do feel the same way. You are the best man I know, Jake Morrison. You are honest and kind and hardworking. You see me for who I really am, not who you think I should be. That means more to me than I can possibly say." Jake leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "May I kiss you?" "I wish you would," Clara whispered. Their first kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they drew apart, both were smiling. "I want to court you properly," Jake said. "I want to do this right. I want to talk to your uncle and get his permission and give you time to be sure about me, and then, if you are willing, I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes to all of that," Clara said, kissing him again. "Though I am already sure about you. I was sure about you the moment I saw through your terrible acting about that shoulder wound, and realized you had gone to all that trouble just for a chance to talk to me." Jake laughed, pulling her close. "Was I really that obvious?" "Completely," Clara confirmed. "But it was also completely charming." They stayed by the creek until the stars began to appear, talking about their future, making plans and dreaming together. Jake told Clara he had nearly enough money saved to buy a small piece of land just outside Abilene, a place with good water and grass where he could start raising horses. Clara told him about Dr. Henley's offer to make her a partner in his practice eventually, when he was ready to retire. "We could build a good life here," Jake said, his arm around Clara as she leaned against his shoulder. "You with your medical practice, me with the ranch. We could make Abilene feel like home." "It already does," Clara said softly. "Home is not a place I have learned. It is wherever the people you love are, and I love you, Jake Morrison." It was the first time either of them had said the words, and Jake felt their weight and beauty settle over him like a blessing. "I love you too, Clara Bennett. I will love you for the rest of my days." The following Sunday, Jake formally asked Uncle George for permission to court Clara with the intention of marriage. Uncle George, in his typically economical way, said, "About time. Clara is happy with you. That is what matters. You have my blessing." Jake bought a small gold ring from the jeweler in town, spending nearly every penny he had saved, but knowing it was worth it. On a crisp October evening, with the leaves turning gold and red on the trees and the air carrying the first hint of approaching winter, Jake took Clara back to the creek where they had first confessed their love. He had spent the afternoon preparing, spreading blankets and lighting candles in glass jars that cast warm, flickering light. When Clara arrived and saw what he had done, she pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes filling with happy tears. "Jake, this is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Jake said, taking her hands in his. "Clara, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have made me believe in a future I never dared to imagine before. You are my best friend, my love, my everything. And I know I am supposed to wait longer, to court you for a proper amount of time, but I cannot wait another day to ask you this." He dropped to one knee, pulling the ring from his pocket. "Clara Bennett, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and let me spend the rest of my life loving you?" "Yes," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, they kissed with all the joy and promise of their future together. They were married in November, in the small church in Abilene, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Clara wore a simple white dress that Aunt Martha and several other women had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that somehow the local florist had managed to preserve despite the season. Jake wore a new suit that made him feel uncomfortable and awkward until he saw Clara walking down the aisle toward him, and then nothing else mattered. Dr. Henley gave Clara away, standing in for her late father, and there was not a dry eye in the church when he placed her hand in Jake's with a gentle, "Take care of each other." "I promise," Jake said solemnly, and he meant it with his whole heart. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. But Jake's favorite moment was when he and Clara finally escaped to the small house he had rented for them on the edge of town, a modest two-room place that Clara had already begun to make into a home. "Hello, wife," Jake said, closing the door behind them and pulling Clara into his arms. "Hello, husband," Clara replied, her eyes sparkling with happiness and anticipation. That night, they began their life together in earnest, and Jake thanked whatever Providence had put him in the path of that bullet, had given him the foolish courage to exaggerate his injury, and had blessed him with a woman smart enough to see through him and kind enough to stay anyway. The winter passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Jake took a job as foreman for the Rockingham Ranch, work that paid well and gave him authority over the other cowboys. He saved every penny he could, building toward the dream of his own land. Clara continued working with Dr. Henley, and her reputation as a skilled and compassionate nurse grew throughout the community. More and more, people came specifically requesting her care. In the evenings, they would sit together in their small house, Jake reading aloud from newspapers while Clara sewed or prepared medicines. They talked about everything, from the day's events to their plans for the future. They laughed together, sometimes argued in the way of couples learning to navigate life together, and always made up before sleeping, holding each other close through the cold winter nights. In February, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Jake over breakfast one Sunday morning, watching his face carefully as she said the words. For a moment, he simply stared at her, processing the news. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, we are going to have a baby." "Truly," Clara confirmed and found herself swept up in his arms, held tight against his chest as he buried his face in her hair. "I am going to be a father," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could feel his joy radiating from him. Happy does not begin to cover it, Jake said, pulling back to look at her. I am terrified and thrilled and so grateful I can barely breathe. We made a life, Clara, a whole new person who will be part you and part me. How could I be anything but overjoyed? Over the following months, Jake became almost comically protective. He would not let Clara lift anything heavier than a teacup, insisted she rest constantly, and worried over every little symptom. Clara bore his fussing with patient amusement, though she had to firmly tell him more than once that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her work. In May, Jake received word that the land he had been interested in was for sale. It was 160 acres with a creek running through it, good grass, and a small but sturdy cabin already built. The price was more than fair, and with the money Jake had saved plus a small loan from the bank, it was within reach. Should we wait? Jake asked Clara as they discussed it. With the baby coming, maybe this is not the right time. Jake Morrison, we have been dreaming of this since we met, Clara said firmly. We have the money, the land is perfect, and waiting will not make it easier. Let's build our future now, not someday. Our child will grow up on our own land, in our own home. What could be better than that? So Jake bought the land, and they began the process of moving from their rented house to the cabin on their new property. It was smaller than the house in town, but it was theirs, and Clara immediately began planning improvements and additions. The cattle brand Jake registered with the county was a simple design, a C and a J intertwined for Clara and Jake. He called the ranch the CJ Ranch, and Clara teased him about being sentimental. I am sentimental when it comes to you, Jake admitted without shame. Always will be. They spent the summer fixing up the cabin and beginning to build the ranch. Jake bought his first horses, good breeding stock, and started working with them in the evenings after his day's work at the Rocking M was done. Clara continued working with Dr. Henley 3 days a week, with Jake driving her into town and picking her up, refusing to let her make the journey alone in her condition. In September, as the leaves once again turned gold and the air grew crisp, Clara went into labor. Jake, who had faced down stampeding cattle and violent storms without flinching, nearly fell apart with fear. He raced to town to fetch Dr. Henley, driving the wagon so fast that the old physician had to shout at him to slow down before he killed them both. Aunt Martha came as well, and together she and Dr. Henley worked through the long night while Jake paced outside, praying to every deity he could think of. When dawn broke and he finally heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn, Jake burst through the door without waiting for permission. Clara lay in their bed, looking exhausted and beautiful, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby wrapped in a soft blanket. Jake, Clara said, her voice tired but full of wonder. Come meet your son, a son. Jake approached on shaking legs, hardly daring to believe this was real. Clara shifted the baby so Jake could see him properly. He was impossibly small, with a cap of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of the world. His tiny fists waved in the air, and Jake watched in amazement as one miniature hand wrapped around his finger when he offered it. He is perfect, Jake whispered. You are amazing. Clara, I cannot believe you did this. You created him. You brought him into the world. We created him, Clara corrected gently. What should we name him? They had discussed names but had not decided on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Jake said, What about William? After your father, tears filled Clara's eyes. William Morrison, I love it, Will for short. Will Morrison, Jake said, trying it out. Welcome to the world, Will. Your mother and I have been waiting to meet you. The next months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant wonder. Jake had never imagined how completely a tiny baby could dominate every aspect of life. Will had strong lungs and used them frequently, especially at night. Jake and Clara took turns walking him, singing to him, doing anything to soothe his cries. But even exhausted and overwhelmed, Jake had never been happier. Watching Clara with their son filled Jake with such love it sometimes hurt. She was a natural mother, patient and gentle but also practical and unflappable. When Will had colic and cried for hours, Clara remained calm, holding him and murmuring reassurances until he finally settled. When he smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, both Jake and Clara cried with joy. Jake reduced his hours at the Rockingham, working only part-time so he could be home more to help Clara and work on building up their own ranch. Money was tighter, but they managed. The horses Jake had bought were producing foals, good stock that would sell well. Clara took on some patients at home, people who needed ongoing care and were willing to make the trip out to the ranch. As Will grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby, Jake marveled at every milestone. The first time Will rolled over, the first time he sat up on his own, the first tooth cutting through his gums. Jake found himself understanding his own parents in a way he never had before, the fierce protective love, the desire to give your child everything good the world has to offer. One evening, when Will was about 8 months old, Jake sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over their land. Clara came out and settled beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder while Will dozed against her chest. "You ever think about that day in Abilene?" Clara asked. "When you got shot?" "Sometimes," Jake admitted. "I think about how I almost did not go into town that day, I almost stayed at the ranch, and then I think about how my whole life would be different if I had made that choice. I would never have met you, we would not have Will. This whole beautiful life we have built would not exist." "I think about that too," Clara said. "And I think about how you pretended to be hurt just to spend time with me. It should have made me angry, but instead it made me fall for you. You were so earnest and so obviously nervous. It was sweet." Jake laughed. "I was terrified you would send me away, and then terrified you would find out I was exaggerating, and then, when you did find out, terrified you would never forgive me. But I saw through it," Clara said, tilting her head to look up at him, "and I stayed close anyway. Because even then I knew you were someone special, someone worth taking a chance on." "Best decision you ever made," Jake teased. "Second best," Clara corrected. "The best decision I ever made was coming west in the first place. Everything good in my life came from that choice." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Will stirred and made a small sound, then settled again. "I love our life," Jake said quietly. "I know it is not easy and we do not have much money and the work is hard. But I would not trade it for anything. You and Will, this land, the future we are building together, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I knew to hope for." "I love our life too," Clara agreed. "And Jake, thank you." "For what?" "For being exactly who you are. For loving me the way you do, for being such a wonderful father to Will, for building this dream with me, for everything." Jake kissed the top of her head. "You never have to thank me for any of that. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." As the years passed, the CJ Ranch grew and prospered. Jake's horses developed a reputation for quality, and he began to make real money selling them to ranchers throughout Kansas and beyond. Clara, working in partnership with Dr. Henley now, opened a small clinic on their property, a separate building where people from the surrounding area could come for care. It was not the hospital of her dreams yet, but it was a start, and she helped dozens of families who otherwise would have had no access to medical care. Will grew into a sturdy, adventurous little boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. At 2 years old, he was already following Jake around the ranch, trying to help with the horses. At 3, he announced he was going to be a cowboy like his daddy. Clara laughed and said he could be whatever he wanted to be, which seemed to satisfy him. When Will was 4, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was sick for the first few months and tired all the time. Jake took on more of the household duties, cooking and cleaning and caring for Will while Clara rested. Dr. Henley checked on her frequently, and while he assured them that everything was progressing normally, Jake could not shake his worry. "I am fine," Clara kept telling him. "This is just how it is sometimes. Some pregnancies are easier than others." "I know," Jake said. But I am allowed to worry about you. You are my whole world, Clara. Your whole world is currently demanding to know if he can have a cookie before dinner, Clara said with a smile, nodding toward Will, who was tugging on Jake's sleeve. No cookies before dinner, Jake told his son firmly. But you can help me feed the horses after dinner if you eat all your vegetables. Will's face lit up. All of them, even the carrots, especially the carrots. In April, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Emma after Jake's mother. The birth was easier than Will's had been, despite the difficult pregnancy, and Emma came into the world quietly, looking around with wide, curious eyes. She is so tiny, Will said, peering at his sister with fascination. Can I hold her? When you are sitting down, Clara said. She is very delicate. They settled Will on the bed beside Clara, supporting him carefully, and placed Emma in his arms. Will looked down at his sister with an expression of pure awe. Hi, Emma, he whispered. I am your big brother, Will. I am going to teach you everything I know. Jake met Clara's eyes over their children's heads, and they shared a smile full of contentment and joy. With 2 children and a growing ranch and clinic, life became busier than ever. There were days when Jake and Clara barely had a moment alone together, when they fell into bed exhausted only to be woken hours later by Emma crying or Will having a nightmare. But there were also perfect moments. Watching Will carefully show Emma the horses, her tiny hands reaching out to touch their soft noses, the 4 of them having picnics by the creek on Sunday afternoons. Emma's first steps, taken while trying to chase after her adored older brother. Will starting school in town and coming home bursting with everything he had learned. By the time Emma was 3 and Will was 7, the CJ Ranch had become one of the most successful small ranches in the region. Jake had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Clara's clinic was busy enough that she had taken on a young woman as an apprentice nurse. They had added rooms onto the cabin, expanding it into a real house with space for their growing family. One evening, Jake and Clara sat on the porch watching Will teach Emma how to whistle. It was not going well, with Emma mostly just blowing spit, but both children were laughing. Do you remember when you told me you wanted to open a hospital? Jake asked. Of course, Clara said. That is still my dream, though the clinic keeps me busy enough for now. What if it did not have to wait? Jake said. What if we could start working toward it now? Clara turned to look at him, surprise in her eyes. Jake, a hospital would cost thousands of dollars. We are doing well, but we do not have that kind of money. Not yet, Jake agreed, but I have been thinking. The ranch is profitable. Your clinic brings in money too, and I have been talking to some of the other ranchers and businessmen in the area. There is interest in establishing a real hospital in Abilene, something between here and Kansas City. If we could get enough people to invest, to commit to funding it, we could make it happen. Not immediately, but in the next few years maybe. Clara stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Are you serious? You have been planning this for months, Jake admitted. I have been putting together proposals, talking to people. I did not want to say anything until I knew it was actually possible. But Clara, I think we can do this. I think we can build your hospital. Clara threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. How did I get so lucky? How did I find you? You did not find me, Jake said, holding her tight. I got fake shot and then you saw through my terrible acting and stayed anyway. Best thing that ever happened to me. Best thing that ever happened to both of us, Clara corrected. Over the next 3 years, they worked toward making the hospital a reality. Jake and Clara held meetings, raised funds, convinced investors. It was slow, frustrating work with setbacks and disappointments along the way. But gradually, the money came together. A plot of land was purchased on the edge of Abilene. An architect was hired to draw up plans. Construction began. Clara was involved in every decision, from the layout of the rooms to the medical equipment they would need. She corresponded with hospitals back east, learning from their experiences, figuring out what worked and what did not. She made plans for staffing, for policies and procedures, for how they would serve people who could not afford to pay. The day the Abilene Community Hospital opened its doors was one of the proudest of Clara's life. The building was modest but well-designed, with 20 beds, a surgical suite, and modern equipment. Clara had been appointed as the hospital's first head nurse, working alongside Dr. Henley and 2 other physicians who had moved to Abilene specifically to be part of the hospital. At the dedication ceremony, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance, the mayor gave a speech praising Clara's vision and dedication. Then he asked Clara to say a few words. Clara stood before the crowd, Jake beside her with Will, now 10, and Emma, now 6, holding his hands. She looked out at the community that had become her home, at the hospital she had dreamed of for so long, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "When I came to Abilene 11 years ago," she began, "I was running from a life that felt too small, too constrained. I was looking for a place where I could be useful, where I could make a difference. I found that place here. But more than that, I found a family." She looked at Jake, at their children. "And I found a community that believed in this dream as much as I did. This hospital exists because all of you made it possible. It belongs to all of us. And it will serve all of us, rich or poor, for generations to come. Thank you for believing in me and for believing in what we could build together." The applause was thunderous, and Clara stepped down to find herself enveloped in Jake's arms. "I am so proud of you," he murmured against her hair. "So incredibly proud. We did this together," Clara insisted. "None of it would have been possible without you." As the years continued to pass, the hospital thrived and the ranch prospered. Will grew into a responsible young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Emma showed an interest in medicine, often accompanying her mother to the hospital, and asking endless questions about how the human body worked. Jake and Clara grew older together, their hair gaining threads of silver, lines appearing around their eyes from years of laughter and life. But their love, if anything, grew deeper and stronger. They still sat on their porch most evenings, watching the sun set over their land, talking about the day and their plans and their memories. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jake took Clara back to the creek where he had proposed. It looked much the same as it had all those years ago, the cottonwood trees perhaps a bit taller, the water still running clear and cool. "I wanted to bring you back here," Jake said, taking Clara's hands in his. "To remember where we started and celebrate where we are now. 20 years, Clara. 20 years of being your husband, and it still does not feel like enough. I want 20 more, 40 more, a whole lifetime more." "You have me for as long as we both shall live," Clara said, her eyes shining with the same love she had shown him from the beginning. "And even then, I think my soul will find yours in whatever comes after. You are my person, Jake Morrison. Today, tomorrow, always." They kissed as the sun set behind them, 2 people who had found each other through chance and built a love that would last forever. By the time they celebrated their 25th anniversary, they were grandparents. Will had married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and they had given Jake and Clara 2 grandsons. Emma had gone to medical school back east, becoming a doctor, and had recently returned to Abilene to work at the hospital her mother had founded. The CJ Ranch was now one of the largest and most successful ranches in Kansas, with over 1,000 acres and a reputation for producing the finest horses in the state. The Abilene Community Hospital had expanded twice and now served patients from all over the region. Jake and Clara had achieved everything they had dreamed of and more, but their greatest achievement, they both agreed, was the life they had built together. The love they shared, the family they had raised, the community they had served. It had all started with a bullet that barely broke the skin, and a cowboy brave enough to pretend it was worse than it was. One quiet evening in the spring of 1904, Jake and Clara sat on their porch as they had countless times before. They were both in their early 50s now, still healthy and active but beginning to feel the weight of their years. Will was managing most of the ranch operations now, and Emma was being considered for head of medicine at the hospital. Their grandchildren were growing up strong and happy. Do you ever regret anything? Clara asked, her head resting on Jake's shoulder. Any choices you wish you had made differently? Jake thought about it seriously. No, he finally said. Even the mistakes, the hard times, they all led us here. They made us who we are. If I could go back and change anything, I would not, because I might lose this. I might lose you, lose our family, lose this life we have built, and I would not trade that for anything in the world. I was so angry at you that first day, Clara said with a laugh. When you walked into the doctor's office acting like you were at death's door. You were not angry, Jake protested. You were concerned. I was concerned until I took off that bandage and realized how minor it really was. Then I was angry for about 10 seconds until I realized why you had done it, and then I was charmed despite myself. I knew the moment I saw you rushing toward me in the street that you were going to change my life, Jake said. I did not know how exactly, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. And I was right. You changed everything, Clara. You made everything better, brighter, more worthwhile. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Clara said softly. Freedom and love and a place to belong. You saw who I really was and loved me for it, not despite it. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands and remembering all the years behind them, content with all the years still to come. Jake and Clara Morrison lived long, happy lives. They saw their grandchildren grow and even lived to meet several great-grandchildren. The CJ Ranch continued for generations, passed down through their family. The Abilene Community Hospital grew into a major medical center, and Clara's name was honored on a plaque in the main entrance. Founded through the vision and dedication of Dr. Clara Morrison. But perhaps more than any of their accomplishments or accolades, what people remembered most about Jake and Clara was the love they shared. The way they looked at each other, even after 50 years of marriage, as if they were still those young people falling in love. The way they supported each other's dreams, lifted each other up, and built something beautiful together. And when people asked Jake how he had been lucky enough to marry someone like Clara, he always told the truth. I got shot, he would say with a grin. Or, well, I got grazed by a bullet and then I may have exaggerated how bad it was because I wanted an excuse to talk to her. She saw right through me and stayed anyway. That is when I knew she was the one. Any woman smart enough to see through my nonsense and kind enough to forgive it was someone I wanted to spend my life with. Clara, for her part, would laugh and shake her head. He was the worst actor I had ever seen, she would say. But he was also the most genuine, most honest man I had ever met. Even when he was being ridiculous and pretending to be hurt, he was being honest about his feelings, and that made all the difference. Their story became a favorite in Abilene, told and retold with embellishments and laughter. The cowboy who faked an injury for love, and the nurse who saw through him and loved him anyway. It was a story about taking chances, about being brave enough to be foolish for love, about finding someone who sees you truly and stays anyway in the end. That is what love is. Not perfect people finding each other, but imperfect people choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Building something together that is stronger than either of them alone. Creating a life that honors both their dreams and their reality. Jake and Clara Morrison built that kind of love. And it lasted them all their days.